The Heat are listening to trade offers for Jimmy Butler. Is this the end of an era? We'll break down what happens next on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. Have a jam-packed live show for you today, for those watching us live on YouTube around noon on Tuesday, on the heels of ESPN reporting that the Heat are listening to trade offers for Jimmy Butler. We'll discuss some of the potential trade packages, why this report is coming out now, and what happens next for the Miami Heat. But let's start with the tweet from Shams Charania, who blew up the internet basically with this thing. So ESPN getting what they paid for with Shams here, reporting that the Heat are open to listening to offers for Jimmy Butler. League sources tell ESPN the six-time All-Star is believed to prefer a win-now contender in any trade. So David, when you saw this report come down, what were your immediate thoughts?
I was unmoved. I didn't think it was anything different than what we had been talking about, or kind of going around the subject, that the Heat front office is concerned about Jimmy's contract and his longevity and his continued impact, and that it just makes sense for them to be able to listen to offers. We heard that they were listening to some kind of offers, or at least taking phone calls from other teams earlier in the offseason. There's been concerns about Jimmy's contract and how they were going to put a pin in the whole discussion during the course of the regular season, knowing they'd have to address it at some point down the road. But I don't see this as the team actively looking to shop Jimmy Butler, other than just saying, we're going to take calls. We know that there's an issue at stake here. And you also have to consider a couple of different factors. One, Shams is looking to drum up business on his new employer, and he's trying to show that he is getting his money's worth, that they're getting his money's worth, as you just alluded to. The ESPN hired him as an insider. He's got to stir the pot from time to time.
But you don't think he's making this up, do you?
I don't think he's making it up. I think it's glorifying non-information. I think it's looking at something that happens over the course of any regular season between the front offices, and is making it seem like this is going to be a move that happens almost immediately. I don't buy it. I don't think we're going to see anything from the team at any point soon. They won three games in a row. They're looking like they're playing their best basketball, and Jimmy's been a part of that. He looks happy. He looks contented. He's, ironically, as the tweet comes out, he's serving coffee in his brick and mortar location of Big Face Coffee in Wynwood, Miami. And that's the kind of thing that we kind of overlook. It's like, he doesn't care about this. This isn't coming from him. This isn't coming from the team. We know the team doesn't leak information. So who's benefiting from this? Who gets some advantage of this? And I know that we'll go into the detail throughout the show. But I look at this.
You think it's Shams that gets the most benefit from this report?
I think it's Shams.
Interesting.
And I think his agent also gets some benefit from this as well. And that's what he's supposed to do on behalf of his client.
So there's a couple different sides here, right? There is definitely the part of Jimmy Butler looking for that extension. That's always baked into this. There's another part of this of where do the Miami Heat stand right now? I mean, yes, they've won 3 games in a row, but they're also 12-10. They're in 5th place in the Eastern Conference. Like a 3-game win streak is great for fans. It's great for us to talk about. It's fun. Like, all the players obviously enjoy it. You want to win games, but the front office's job is to look at this soberly and say, okay, 3-game win streak, that's kind of cool. But what are we really doing this season? Do we have a chance to compete? And this week is really interesting across the NBA because of what the NBA Cup has done. It's sort of built in this sort of pseudo bye week, where I think a lot of teams across the NBA are kind of going to say, like, okay, let's look at our roster, let's look at where we stand versus the rest of the competition, and just really kind of reevaluate things at sort of the 20-game mark here. And I don't know how old this information is from Shams. For the record, Shams is plugged in as anybody else. He's got this job for a reason. I don't think he's making any of this up. Maybe there's a certain amount of glorifying, but that kind of comes with the job. It comes with the territory. But I do think the fact that the Heat are open to listening to offers for Butler and making a deal if the proposal is right. That's what Shams wrote in the actual article on ESPN. To your point, David, that's not like the Heat are putting Jimmy Butler on the trade block, but I do think it's more then we're not doing anything and we're kicking this can down the road until next summer. I do think that the Heat are at least showing a willingness to say, all right, you make the right offer, we will listen. Right? You make a compelling offer, we will at least have a meeting about it. Where in the summer, teams like Golden State, perhaps Philadelphia, New York, Brooklyn called the Miami Heat, and it wasn't so much a we're listening. It was like, hey, what do you want to talk about? Oh, Jimmy Butler, nothing to talk about. Hang up the phone. I don't think the Heat are just hanging up the phone right away anymore. And I think at least that to me is how this report reads. How significant that is, I guess, is up to interpretation.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, there is a slight differentiation. Again, I've made this point many times before, and I think it bears repeating because we live in this, Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, world where we see these transactions taking place, and we think it takes place over the course of a simple conversation, a direct, request for a player, a back and forth about what players get moved, and it's done within a matter of seconds. That's ridiculous. That's never been the way it works. It's conversational, people. Keep that in mind. Somebody that might have called 3 months ago might be calling now, looking at the Heat and saying, yeah, 12-10. Are you guys really that good? What do you think you're going to do with Jimmy this summer? Pat.
It's a great point, right? The 20 game mark isn't just the internal review. Teams like front offices are doing reviews of other teams. So like a team like the Warriors, for instance, that might have called in the summer, might call 20 games in and say, hey, here's where we're at. How are you guys feeling about your team, and how are you guys feeling about holding on to Jimmy? It's to your point. It's a great point.
Yeah. So I think that's basically what we're seeing. It's just basically a conversation, and the front office, the Heat front office, is taking calls. And that's exactly what Shams tweeted. They're taking calls, not, oh, we want to move Jimmy. We feel like we have to move Jimmy. Nothing with any sense of urgency. So fans are freaking out because it just seems like it's been made concrete because of this tweet by Shams. And I don't see it that way. I see it's just, what it's basically just reporting, quote unquote, reporting something that's been happening for a while.
Well, if I could push back on that a little bit, the difference between hanging up the phone right away and now listening to the phone call, that is new news. That is a development here.
That's
fair. So because there's a list of players across the league where you do just hang the phone up, right? Minnesota, you ask about Anthony Edwards, they're hanging the phone up, right? You ask about Nikola Jokic in Denver, they just hang the phone up. Like, I think Jimmy Butler had been in that place for a very long time in Miami, where it was you just hang the phone up. And he's now a notch below that, right? And so that in and of itself is new news. That's new stuff here. And I mean, I get accused a lot of maybe taking a victory lap on this thing because you do look at a report like this, and again, I'll push back. It's not urgent. It doesn't mean that something's going to happen right away, but you don't really see stuff like this happen and then that other shoe not drop. It does sort of feel like we're getting to that other shoe dropping, or it's at least hanging there. And we're just like, is that thing going to drop or not? And things can turn around. Maybe this win streak continues and they decide, you know what, we're going to give this thing another run, which is entirely a possibility here. But again, like, I get accused of taking victory laps on this, on our comments and on Twitter and rooting for Jimmy Butler to be traded out of Miami all the time. And the only thing I'll say is, like, this is not a victory lap for me. Like, the emotional, like, part of this, I don't want to see Jimmy Butler leave. I love the big face coffee thing. I love how he's in Miami. I love this era. Like, Locked On Heat is not Locked On Heat if not for the Jimmy Butler era, right? The 2022 run, like the highs of that series, obviously the 2023 finals run, we've never had anything better than that. Heck, before I even rejoined the show, I would just jump on with you in the 2020 bubble after those playoffs because I was so excited to talk about this team and Jimmy Butler essentially turning around this franchise. All I've done for the last couple of months is talk about what was so obviously there in front of us. And I think a lot of people nationally might have hinted at it. I think people locally flat out either hinted at it, talked around it, or ignored it. And again, with all humility possible, I was the only one here telling you this is a very realistic possibility that this is how this thing ends. Because you just look at how the Heat are constructed with the salary cap, and they have three expensive players, and only one of them is 35 years old and getting worse. And Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero, the other two expensive players, and they're young and they're getting better. And if you're a front office and your job is not to be emotional and your job is to be cold and ruthless and calculated, then this is and Jimmy Butler's contract is coming up. This has to be an obvious conversation, and this is not unique to the Miami Heat, right? We just saw Golden State have to say goodbye to Klay Thompson just because of payroll. We just saw the Clippers, to a much lesser degree, because Paul George didn't accomplish anything there. but have to walk away from everything they invested in the Paul George era because of payroll. Like, this is not unique to Miami. This is
Towns, yeah.
Karl-Anthony Towns. Like, this is how things end, right? And I was just here telling you that this is a possibility, but everybody wants Jimmy Butler to retire as a member of the Miami Heat. But like we just saw with Klay Thompson and Golden State, rarely does that happen in the NBA. And so that was the only thing I've ever wanted to explain here. And the difference between journalism and opinion is just so blurred now. And I'm part journalist, part somebody who cares deeply about this team. And I don't know, I try to balance those two hats. I try to wear both hats. I don't know that I always do the best job of it, but I was never rooting for the Heat to trade Jimmy Butler. Like, that's not, like, I like Jimmy Butler. I don't dislike Jimmy Butler. I was just pointing out the thing that was obviously going to happen. And I'll end it on this part, David. And I'm sorry I'm going long here, but it's like, just imagine, had we not talked about it, how shocking this report would be. Yeah. Like, consider us what we had done over these last 2 weeks, these last couple of months, warning you that this could happen. And now we're sort of seeing, again, it's not happening, to your point, David, it's not happening, but this was a little step in, if it were going to happen, this is going to be a step in maybe that eventually happening here.
That's a good point, and I'm glad you clarified that. And it's important for people to understand that because we talk about these things, that doesn't separate our own feelings about the team and the players. And I think we've tried very hard to humanize these players that are often seen as quote unquote assets. And I hate that terminology, and I hate the way that they're viewed by the larger public. But there are lots of factors here, and it's been something important and worth bringing up.
Yeah,
but
just talking about it is not an endorsement. Yes. It's just talk. It's just not ignoring reality. It's just being logical. Yeah.
I will ask this, though, to focus on the latest quote unquote news. Are the Heat more inclined to trade Jimmy now? Do they have to trade Jimmy? Because we're seeing a lot of people say, I mean, at least my interpretation of it is, and this is something that Shams reported, and something that we've known for a while, that Jimmy's going to be opting out at the end of the summer. Do they feel like they have to trade him in order to recoup some assets, or can they simply let him walk this summer? And maybe that's a subject for the next segment.
I think it is. I think we need to talk about that. Plus, if they do trade Jimmy Butler, I think of the list of destinations, there's only maybe a couple that are actually realistic. We'll tell you which one of those they are coming up next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in the same place. So, sometimes you're watching a game. Let's say you're watching the Dolphins as they continue their playoff hunt. You can check out the latest stats in other games, or maybe you want to view live play-by-play, but you can do that and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets, but only when you go visit FanDuel.com and join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. The best way to support the show is to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast app. In terms of Jimmy Butler opting out, the question that you asked kind of going into the break there, David, I think that's part of it. I do think that the Heat, there's different angles of this. I know that the idea is for him to opt out. The idea was also for him to opt out last summer and or to force an extension or get traded, and then he backed off of that. So I'll believe he opts out of $52 million when I see him opt out of $52 million. I still think that some of this is leverage, is, hey, I'm opting out and I want that one more contract. And from Jimmy Butler's perspective, I totally get it. Get that long-term money. But I also wonder, what's the market going to be? There's a difference between what a player is worth and what a player can actually get on the open market. And you look at the teams with cap space there, he's not going to Utah for $40 million a year. That ain't happening. So, if he wants that win now situation, he needs to get traded to one of those teams in order to sign that extension, or just opt into $52 million next year and then figure it out the summer after. But that money isn't exactly sitting there this offseason. And so I think there is maybe some urgency on Jimmy Butler's part to be well, what am I going to do? Am I going to be in Miami long term? Or if not, how do I take care of myself where I'm not, again, playing in Salt Lake City next summer for as much money as possible? And look, there's other ways around it. Houston can clear up some space. Maybe that's ultimately where this thing goes. Brooklyn, we know he likes New York, but Brooklyn's very far from being a win now situation. There's sign and trade possibilities, obviously, too, but that would require him opting out, and then sign. It's very complicated. It hard caps both teams, like all this stuff. So I think the extension is certainly part of this. I do think if you're the Heat, you have to execute some amount of control over your own organization at some point, right? Because you don't know that he's opting out until he opts out. And even if he does opt out, I don't know, like he's 35 years old. Like, do you really want to sign him to whatever it's going to cost and still be in a situation where you're a very expensive team and not all that much better? Like, I think these are all things that both sides have to consider.
What's the money amount that we're talking about here? Because I look at what the potential for a long-term deal, and nobody's going to give him what we typically think of as a long-term deal. It's just going to be more years than just the next year. Like, he could very well have 1 year left in his NBA career. I don't see it that way. I think he's still playing at a pretty high level, but he's got 1 year under contract if he opts in. And beyond that, who knows? Like, that next year could play out the way a lot of players at 36, almost 37 do. And that being the case, he might not have much longer in his NBA career. So what is he potentially looking for? And that's something I'm considering here. And what is his agent trying to drum up here? So I'm thinking 3 years.
Well, DeMar DeRozan, for instance, right?
Yeah.
DeMar DeRozan just signed at 35 years old, 3 years, $75 million. So about $25 million a year.
Yep.
$25 million a year.
And
I think Jimmy's a little bit more than that. But again, they're both 35 years old. DeMar DeRozan's
three for 90. Yeah.
It's 3 for 90, so $30 million. So it's okay. You're 3 for 90. I guess that's a pretty good deal, but is that enough for me to turn down $52.4 million next year?
Well, it's an extra $40 million.
Is it though? It's kind of just over 3 years, but it also is taking me 2 years to basically make up the amount of money that I left on the table for 1 year.
You're right.
He's going to play. Jimmy's going to play until he's 38, 39 years old. Like, I don't know. That's also a big question. Like, how long does this guy want to play basketball?
Yeah, I mean, so that's what I'm saying. Is like there's still the potential that this is all really smoke and mirrors. Like that his preference would still be to opt in and to see what happens at the end of next season, and then entertain the possibility of maybe signing another short-term deal for far less money, maybe 2 for 20, which would basically amount to about 70 come aggregate over those 3 years, as opposed to maybe opting out this summer and seeking a 3 for 90. And doesn't mean we're talking about $20 million, so it's a significant amount. But he's also said that he doesn't care about money and things of that sort. So it's
somebody
really
who's out here leveraging for an extension. He does not care about money.
Yeah, so it's all very kind of difficult for me to process. And again, I pointed to this in the first segment. I think Bernie Lee, his agent, is trying to do his due diligence and trying to stir the pot and trying to create more of a market for a player that might not necessarily have that same market. Because it's to your point.
Well, I do think. I'm sorry, but if we talk about like the market that's out there, like win now teams, like Jimmy Butler and Golden State, that makes a lot of basketball sense to me. I mean, you could even put him in Dallas or in Houston.
Money sense. Not money sense.
In Golden State. Well, let's talk about it. So Shams reported in that piece, and this has been reported and sort of hinted at elsewhere nationally, that if Jimmy Butler were to get traded, he would want a win now situation, and that he has informed teams that he would be willing to play and sign an extension in Golden State, Dallas, or Houston. So you're telling me that the Golden State money part doesn't work. Why do you say that? So we'll start with the Warriors, and then we'll hit those other two teams.
Well, I mean, if they're not willing to retain Klay Thompson, why would they be willing to pay Jimmy Butler significantly more money than what Thompson was looking for? Like, I don't.
Because Jimmy Butler's still a good basketball player.
Fair, but does he significantly? I mean, is Jimmy in Golden State make them a legitimate contender? Like, I think they'd be better, and I think that he'd certainly help, but I don't know that they necessarily have a title window for those 3 seasons or whatever he might be seeking in an extension, and that they would be able to keep that core together and still be able to play at a high level. It's just none of these scenarios makes a lot of sense.
There's one that's totally fair. In terms of the Warriors, it would be Andrew Wiggins' contract would almost certainly have to be in it. A couple of smaller contracts, DeAnthony Melton, Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, just to kind of make the salaries work, and Jonathan Kuminga, and that would probably be the deal. And I think Golden State has 2 future first-round picks that they can include in the deal. Okay, that doesn't, whatever, that could be haggled over. But in terms of getting the contracts and the salaries to work, it would be Wiggins, Kuminga, plus one of those other kind of smaller salaries just to get the matching. If you're the Heat and you're getting, I'll start here. If you're the Heat and you are trading Jimmy Butler, we'll just start with that presumption. You're going to trade Jimmy Butler. What are you looking for? You're looking for, I think, three things. You're looking for a good young player who can fit around a Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero core and help kind of kickstart this new timeline. You're looking for draft capital that you could use to maybe trade for a star down the road, and you're looking for cap relief because you're not going to want to be above the first apron anymore, and because of A, the money, but B, also all the roster restrictions in terms of building out the team. So you'd look for cap relief also. That Warriors deal would get you the young player in Kuminga, and we could have that argument whether or not he's a good fit or whatever. He's also part of this, is also due for an extension this summer. So if you're the Heat and you think Kuminga might be a fit, you almost want to get him in your house sooner rather than later so you can get a real evaluation of him. Or maybe that whole situation is so scary that you don't want to do it at all. Also,
which is
totally
typical.
Plausible.
Is typical of what Miami does. Like, they try to get guys on the last end of their deal in order to kind of figure out, this is somebody that we want to secure long term. They did it with Alonzo Mourning. They did it with Tim Hardaway. They've done it throughout Pat Riley's tenure in terms of acquiring a player and say, okay, this is somebody we want to continue to build our future around. And so that makes a lot of sense.
And then, if it's not Kuminga, would they be willing to move Brandon Podziemski? But like, what's Podziemski's ceiling? Like, good role player? Like, I don't know. Like, Joe Lacob's out there calling him a future all-star, but like, I don't know. Yeah. So the Heat worked him out. They did work out Podziemski, but they also picked Jaime Jaquez over him. So I don't know. But whatever. So that would be the Warriors deal. I think that makes the Warriors better. And maybe that's all you're really asking for in the Western Conference, is to be better. Like, Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and Steph Curry on the court together. That's a good mix. Like that to me makes sense. And they've been looking for a wing, but I don't know if the Warriors are willing to move off of Kuminga and Podziemski and these picks and all that stuff that the Heat would probably ask for. The Mavericks are the other one. We can just nip this one in the bud right away. This is I don't see how this happens. They would have to trade basically half their roster just to get up in salary, because they're not going to trade Kyrie Irving, and certainly they're not going to trade Luka for Jimmy Butler. So it would have to be like Klay Thompson, Daniel Gafford, Maxi Kleber, Quentin Grimes, Jaden Hardy. And the Mavericks only have one first-round pick that they could trade in 2025. And that's not going to be like a top 20 pick. Like, the Mavericks are good. They were in the finals last year. That's going to be the 27th pick in the draft or something, like whatever. So, I don't know that the value is there for Miami. And then if you're Dallas, like, you're also giving up all your depth. And I texted Nick Engstad, who covers the team for Locked On Mavericks, and I was like, would you do PJ Washington instead of Klay Thompson? Because also Klay at 35 years old has very little value in a rebuilding Heat team. Would you do PJ Washington's contract? And he said, absolutely not. I don't see Dallas doing that. So there's that. There is one team that does make sense. I'm sorry that to have gone long there, but one team does make a little bit more sense than the other ones. We'll break that one down next. Plus, what happens for the Heat if they do have to trade Jimmy Butler? We'll touch on that all here coming up on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time and their new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite events live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out all the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Sometimes buying tickets is just a spur of the moment kind of thing. You don't want to have to deal with the hassle of trying to find the right tickets at the right price. That's why Game Time has you covered. Plus, they've got their all-in pricing feature. I love it. Using that feature shows you the total right up front, so there are no surprise fees at checkout. You don't want to get hit with an extra charge for this or that. You don't even know what you're paying for sometimes. Not with Game Time. They got you covered. Plus, you can see exactly where you're going to be sitting from their seat view feature. Gives you a panoramic view of a seat if you're in a venue that you've never been at before. It's a great and convenient way to know exactly where you'll be sitting before you buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Thanks again to everybody tuning in to this breaking news episode live on YouTube. Of course, you can find the restream of it on YouTube and in your podcast app. Make sure to follow and subscribe over there. Like the video if you're watching live. All right. The other team on Jimmy Butler's list was the Houston Rockets. Jimmy Butler, obviously Houston, that's his hometown. This is the team that makes the most sense in terms of a trade package for Miami, right? If you're talking about those three things that the Heat want, they could provide all those three things. The draft picks, they got a bunch of them. The good young player, they got a bunch of them. The salary cap relief, They could definitely provide some of that because they're, unlike Dallas and Golden State, still almost $11 million under the luxury tax. So they can actually take on more money as opposed to those other teams that can't really do that. So Miami could send like an extra $5 million out there, and then obviously you're getting off of the long-term stuff with Jimmy Butler, opt in, opt out, and sign to extension, whatever. So I'm going to throw a package your way. You tell me what you think about it. It would basically have to be Dylan Brooks' salary. And he's been playing really well for Houston this year.
Sure.
Steven Adams on an expiring $12 million. That's helpful to get the contracts up. And then you get I think you get a young player like Jabari Smith Jr., and then maybe like a Cam Whitmore, who's kind of been struggling this year for them, showed some flashes as a rookie, has been in the G League a little bit. So let's say it's Brooks, Adams, Jabari Smith Jr., plus maybe we can haggle over including a Cam Whitmore and maybe a couple of draft picks or whatever it might be. How do you feel about that if you're Miami?
Not great. I saw Dan Devine tweet a package that included Jalen Green just to make the numbers work.
So Jalen Green, from what I understand, can't be traded over during the regular season because he just signed that extension in October. But he could be traded potentially if this was a deal in the summer. But Jalen Green cannot be traded over the course of the regular season.
Okay, so that's not what they want because they want to win now after years of losing. So I think they would probably try and resist that anyway. And plus Green, I think they still view him pretty highly and think he's not a centerpiece, but at least a key piece moving forward, unless they could get a significant upgrade. And I'm not, again, saying that Jimmy would be a significant upgrade.
They might have traded Jalen Green for Jimmy Butler, but I don't know if the Heat even want Jalen Green or if, like that's not even on the table anymore. So, and then in terms of the other guys, like the Heat might ask for an Amen Thompson, who I would hope they would at least ask for. I think Houston would just say no, not worth it. Reed Shepard, I think they would say no, not worth it. You're not getting Alperen Şengün from Houston. He's a pillar of what they're building there. And who's the other guy? Tari Eason, who I love, has been balling out for Houston, and they also view him as a centerpiece also. So those are like the best prospects on Houston's roster. I think the Rockets might just be like, you know what? We're good with the roster. We don't need Jimmy Butler. We're fine. But if it was just Jabari Smith Jr., I don't know. I could at least see them going in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, again, it makes sense in terms of they're a young team. They've achieved some success. It's the regular season. That's all fine and good. What was the trade? Oh, Jeff Green would be included too. That's another one of those short-term deals there.
Yeah, 8 years expiring, or $8 million expiring. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get it. Like, he provides veteran leadership. You don't know what this young team is going to do once they actually get into the playoffs. They've never been tested like that before. Jimmy's certainly a player who has. So if he could carry this group, he'd thrive there. It would be a great deal for them in the short term. And I guess they'd be willing to pay him based on whatever they achieved this year in the long term too. So he could get that extension, whatever amount that might be. He could potentially get it from the Houston Rockets. From the Heat perspective, again, you're getting that young player. You're getting perhaps a draft pick. You're getting some cap relief that keeps you in contention. It makes the most sense. I think of all the quote unquote contending teams that might be interested in Jimmy's salary and that Jimmy might be interested in playing for, Houston is the only team that really makes sense. I don't buy the Warriors. I don't buy the Mavs, and we talked about that already. So if you're looking at a team that's a potential trade partner, it would almost surely have to be the Houston Rockets. Now, the other question here, and I've seen a lot of people in our comments kind of point this out, is it the first step of other dominoes that have to fall in that Easter basket? Like, do you have to be able to move other players? Do you just blow the whole thing up? Because there's a question now, if Jimmy isn't on the roster anymore, what is your core? Do you even have a core in Miami? Does that include Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero? And do you look to move them perhaps while their value is at an all-time high?
You could. I think that you certainly could do that. I don't know that you have to, right? Like Jimmy Butler's 35, Bam's 27, Tyler's 24. Like, we're not talking about guys in the same timeline, right? Like, if all these guys were past 30, then yeah, maybe you do what the Boston Celtics did when they just traded Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, they traded everybody. They said, we're going to reset the timeline altogether. Like, weirdly, Jimmy Butler, it's gotten to the point where he doesn't even like fit on this roster timeline wise.
Yes.
Like everybody else is 27
different timelines.
Yeah, it's 27 years old or younger. So yeah, I don't see that as a necessity. I mean, but obviously, if you're the front office and you say like, hey, do we want to trade? Like your former co-host on Locked On NBA, Matt Moore, texted me and he was just like, I think you have to try to trade Tyler Hero when his value is high. Not to throw Matt Moore under the bus, but I think he also said it on his show. It's like, I don't know that you have to. I think this is just who Tyler Hero is now. I think Bam's awesome. Like, I don't think you have to do that by any stretch. And plus, if you're acquiring this stuff with the intent of, okay, now we have more assets that we can move for a star down the road, those stars would want to play with Bam, right? Presumably. So, De'Aaron Fox, like all these guys that have also been in trade, whose people are wondering what their future is. Like, you don't want to start from nothing, because then you end up being the Brooklyn Nets and you're like, yeah, we don't have anything. And no real star. And like, I don't know if any star wants to go there. So, it's a balance. And I don't think also Miami does that.
No, typically they don't blow. They want to at least keep one foundational piece, and for better or for worse, I think they see Bam as that piece. So
if I can ask you one more question before we sign off here.
Let's do it.
Do you have to listen to Jimmy Butler's list?
Absolutely not.
We just saw Portland just say, cool list, Damian Lillard. We're trading you to Milwaukee. I got text messages from so many people around the Denver Nuggets being like, what about this trade package? Like, they're ready to make that move, and they're certainly going to win now. Like Michael Porter Jr. or draft pick Zeke Naji, like, we don't have to debate whether or not that's a good package or not. But like, that's sort of what they're throwing at us. And then it's not, but it's like they could throw that at us. But and then like, what if like the Memphis Grizzlies said, we're looking for a solid answer at small forward. Like, here's Desmond Bane, Brandon Clark, and some draft picks. Like, we have seen this in the past with Damian Lillard or even Donovan Mitchell being sent to Cleveland, where these teams just say, you know what, we're just going to take the best trade package.
No, yeah, I don't think so. I think they've done a lot to build goodwill since 2016 and Dwayne's departure. I think they continue to do so actively with all of the different honors that they've presented to retired players and active players, like everything that they've done to make Bam the centerpiece of the team because they view him as such, and then welcoming his mom and making her a part of the Heat family and everything else that they've actively done to show we believe in the family of the Miami Heat. But guess what? Even family members fight from time to time, and they don't have to care, nor should they. I love it from a personal perspective. If Miami could get what they want and what they need, and if they could send Jimmy to a place that he wants to be at, and he can get what he needs, a chance at a title, but they don't have to do that. They could ship him anywhere. I just don't see any other team kind of clamoring, oh yeah, I'd love a 35-year-old star that has shown to be somewhat temperamental in the past, and while that might have been overblown in various spots, I don't think they'd be willing to blow up their team and say, yeah, now we can build around this guy at 35. Like, that's
right, but that's why I bring up like a team like Denver or Memphis, who are maybe a piece away, right? And so exactly. That stuff sort of makes sense. But also, I don't know that those teams have better packages. I just think they have different packages. So a lot more to carve into this, and we have days and months and whatever to do that. For now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Thanks to everybody who tuned in live on this Tuesday afternoon. Again, if you missed any of this, you could find the whole thing up on YouTube in your podcast feed. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.